Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Naughty, an erotic Christmas novella, and Nasty, an erotic spinoff, by Sabrina B. Scales, narrated by Wesleigh Siobhan and Jakobi Diem. Naughty, an erotic Christmas novella. Chapter 1. Nedra. No chestnuts were roasting by the open fire, and Jack Frost hadn't nipped at anything for at least 7 days. Yuletide carols were playing on the radio, and all I was wearing was a pair of sky-high heels and a red fishnet romper that showed more of my skin than the law would allow. Darryl had promised to be here by 9. It was nearing 10:30, and he hadn't called or replied to my texts. But that was no surprise. He pulled this kind of shit all the time. I don't know why I kept getting my hopes up when it came to my ex. He wasn't good for me when we split all of 6 months prior. And he was still no good for me now. But parts of him were. Namely, the parts between his neck and eyes, and a larger part below his waist. I'd never had a man lick the lining of my pussy with such attention to detail that he could probably identify it in a lineup, which is why I'd still been seeing him, though technically we weren't together. Darryl was a terrible mate as soon as we left to the bedroom, but while we were in there, he was in there. I'd just decided to give up on a night of sexual maintenance with a man I'd broken up with at a mutual friend's wedding reception. Then a gentle knock at the door pulled me out of my thoughts, and I nearly broke my ankle turning from my window to see who it was. It couldn't have been Darryl, because he still had a key. I lived alone and felt safer knowing that someone other than my mama, Daddy, and younger brother could come in to make sure I was okay, in case I slipped in the shower and busted my head open or something. I raised up on my tiptoes and looked through the peephole. My heart sank to my stomach when I saw that it wasn't Darryl, but my neighbor Justin from the apartment next door, looking as fine as God intended, for all intents and purposes. 6'2", coffee brown, slim, and too sexy to be around unattended. Justin was the definition of boyfriend material, if that's the type of thing you were into. Darryl had ruined my desire for that, and many other things over a span of 5 years. But I'd be a fool not to recognize a good man when I saw one, and Justin was definitely that. We worked out at the same gym, so he was familiar with my physique. But that didn't stop him from staring when I opened the door, pulling on a robe and securing it at the waist. "Can I help you?" I asked on an agitated sigh, propping a hand on my silk-covered hip. I was 5 miles past horny, tipsy from 2 shots of Patron, and I definitely wasn't in the mood for whatever sweet treats Justin was offering. His mother ran a bakery on the other side of town, and he was always stopping by to let me sample this or that. I blamed him for my hips maintaining a spread, despite the fact that I worked out 4 days a week. He'd always reply with a smile saying that he didn't see the problem. "Actually, I was hoping maybe you could." He pulled his eyes from my barely covered tits, and I commended him for that, because most men couldn't. "With what?" I asked, folding my arms across my chest. A mild breeze from outside swept over the both of us, sending my nipples from soft to solid underneath my silk robe. "Justin?" I reminded him that I was there. My nipples had grabbed his eyes and wouldn't let go so easily this time. My bad. He shook his head. Smooth, melodic voice exciting me so easily it was damn near embarrassing. Milk. I needed to borrow some milk, he stuttered. I took a step back to let him in. That cold front that the weatherman had been promising us all week seemed to have finally arrived. And though Justin was wearing sweats that would protect his long legs from the chill, that thin, blue Nike t-shirt wasn't gonna cut it for his chest. I'm guessing you need a cup, too? I looked down at his empty hands, taking a second to canvass the not-so-empty crotch of his sweats. Yeah, guess I forgot. He grinned, full brown lips curving to the side. He stepped in and pulled the door closed behind him, eyes glued to my behind as I turned to walk away. What are you cooking over there? I shouted from the kitchen, reaching up over my head to grab a plastic beverage container from the cabinet. Oh, just some cookies. He stood in the living room with his hands in his pockets, thick brows rising and falling over a set of chestnut eyes. I needed something to wash 'em down with. Still gotta bake 'em. I can drop a few by later if you're still up. Oh, I'm expecting company, I said, rounding the corner with his milk in hand. Maybe tomorrow. I held my robe closed with one hand and extended his milk with the other. Okay, bet. He took the milk from my hands, dipped his chin and winked to thank me, and went on his way without any further questions. After closing the door and locking it behind Justin, I returned to the living room in response to my chiming phone. I picked it up to find a message from Darryl stating that he wouldn't be able to make it because his wife wasn't letting him leave. Wife? I said to myself, pressing a hand to my chest, and I almost jammed my fingers navigating to the call screen. My call went straight to voicemail, and it was all I could do not to scream. It was 1 week before my cycle started, and I was too horny to think straight. Fuck it. I tightened the rope of my robe around my waist, turned the lights off in my place, and decided to take matters into my own hands, literally and figuratively. If Darryl was going to keep secrets and put the dick on freeze, I'd just get it from somewhere else, from someone who owed me for a glass of milk.
Justin. There were about 3 minutes left on the cookies when I heard the doorbell ring. The temperature had dropped nearly 20 degrees in the past hour, so I figured Mama decided to bring over some of her famous chicken soup and fresh-baked sourdough bread. I stepped out of the kitchen, untied my apron strings, and walked over to the door with my mouth already watering. Imagine my surprise when I pulled the door open to find something that looked way more appetizing than any soup I'd ever tasted. Hey, everything all right? I looked down into Nedra's big brown eyes, fighting the urge to glance down at her ample breasts. Nedra was finer than frog hair, and she knew that shit too. I don't know what was taking her so long to come around to a nigga, but I'm assuming it was the lame, big-nosed cat that had been leading her on since I moved in next door. Yeah, everything's fine, she said, folding her arms across her chest. A quick glance down, and I saw that she was still wearing the 4-inch heels she had on when I went over to borrow milk. Must have been gearing up to give what's-his-name an early Christmas present. I hope to hell she wasn't coming over to ask me for advice again. I wouldn't say that me and Nedra were exactly friends, but we frequented the same places and grew some form of kinship over the last 2 years that we'd been neighbors. I never came at her sideways, because she lived alone for the most part and had an on-again, off-again boyfriend. If anything, I felt like I was around as some form of protection. Even if she didn't ask for it, I was always looking out, because I had a sister and hoped that someone would do the same for her. Cool. You want to try these cookies? Got like a minute left before they come out the oven. I pulled the door further open and waved a hand to welcome her in. She followed my lead without hesitance, curvy hips dipping with each step she took. No thanks. She took a seat on the sofa, looking over her shoulder at me as I went into the kitchen to take the cookies out after the oven timer went off. I'm afraid cookies and alcohol don't mix. She relaxed against the sofa cushions on a deep sigh. Oh, you been drinking? I asked, placing the pan of cookies on a cooling rack before picking one up and biting into it. Yep, she replied, voice dry and disengaged. Nothing like the bubbly woman I was used to challenging me to foot races down the block. Well, you're in luck. I placed 6 cookies on a saucer, then poured half the eggnog I'd made with the milk I'd borrowed in one coffee mug, and the other half in another, sprinkling cinnamon on top before taking it into the living room. These bad boys are loaded with rum. I placed the saucer on the table, grabbing a cookie and handing it to her along with a mug of eggnog. Moms can be a bit of a lush around the holidays. Here, take a bite. I offered her my cookie since she was staring at hers like it had a spider on it. I don't know about that, Jus. She frowned, button nose wrinkling up. They smell good, though. And taste better. Here, you know my mama don't play. I held the cookie in front of her full-glossed lips. That crimson lipstick made them look even juicier than usual. I wanted to bite them so bad it hurt. She opened her mouth, finally accepting my offer, biting down on the soft, warm cookie, savoring the taste on a moan with her eyes closed. Damn, she said, eyes peeling open like she'd had an orgasm. Mama Lou really don't want me to lose these hips. She snatched the rest of my cookie and devoured it in 2 bites before doing the same to the one I'd placed in her hand. Is this rum? She asked, through a mouthful of spiked sweetness. A crumb was stuck to her bottom lip, so I reached over and swiped it away with my thumb. Bacardi's finest. I brought a thumb to my mouth and licked the crumb off. That's some good shit. She nodded, retrieving her eggnog from the table and taking a swig to wash down the cookie. And did you just eat a crumb from off my lip? She scrunched her brows, long lashes catching my attention as she slightly widened her eyes. Though she tried hard to pretend she didn't, Nedra had to know how much she got to me. Being around her as much as I was, going back and forth on a daily basis about how we'd mapped out our lives and literally nothing had fallen into place. I got the impression that our upbringings were extremely different based on the plans she'd mentioned. She said that she wanted marriage but didn't want kids, which struck me as odd for a woman for some reason. I'd eat more than that if you stopped playing. That shit slipped out of my mouth before I gave myself a second to think about it. I'm sorry, what? She cleared her throat after swallowing the last of her eggnog. Nothing. I stood from the sofa and collected our mess, taking it to the kitchen and rinsing it out in the sink. Nothing, my ass. Did you just offer to eat my pussy, Justin? She'd gotten up and joined me, laying a palm on the countertop with one hand perched on her hip. I don't know. Is that what you heard? I finished rinsing the dishes and placed them on the drying rack before looking over at her. She sucked her teeth, roving her eyes from the top of my head to the tips of my toes, stepping away from the counter and making her way right in front of me, so close that I could smell her perfume and the cinnamon on her breath. Oh, I heard so much more than that. She licked her juicy lips, trailing a long red fingernail down the center of my chest. I was a master at controlling erections. Did it on a daily basis whenever Nedra walked my way. But with her hands on my body and her eyes looking up at me with a longing that only some hard dick could satisfy, it would take a 10-pound bag of flour to stop my shit from making a full salute under my sweats. I dried my hands with a dish rag with my eyes fixed on her, breathing easy like I wasn't fazed, when my heart was beating like a drum in my chest. She grabbed the towel and threw it on the counter, stepping in closer until her breasts met my chest. I could feel Nedra's nipples hardening against my pecs, and all I wanted to do was get them in my mouth. Taken over by lust that had been building up for years, I grabbed both sides of her face and stared down into her eyes. She roped her arms around my waist, void of words to say, as I took her into my mouth, swallowing those juicy-ass lips. She breathed into my mouth desperate and inaudible words. My dick swelled against her center while I invaded her mouth with my tongue. She tasted so sweet and warm, better than any cookie I'd ever eaten. And as her body melted into me, soft titties smashing against me, sending a bounty of cleavage up for me to indulge in, whatever restraint I'd had went out the door and would probably never return. Still infused in a kiss, I lifted her from the floor and wrapped her thick-toned legs around my waist. She put her arms around me, locking her hands behind my neck as she grinded her pussy against my pelvis, breathing and moaning in my ear. I sucked her neck just a little, desperate to know if every part of her tasted as sweet as her kiss. And I was not disappointed, bathing her sensitive skin with warm swallows from my lips. "You taste so fucking good, Nedra," I whispered in her ear. "I want to taste every damn part of you." I took her lips back into my mouth. She was speechless, tightening her legs around my waist and rolling her hips, pussy warm and open against me as I rushed off to my bedroom. I flipped on the light switch, barely making it through the door, placing her down on her feet so I could pull off that robe. But she beat me to it, dropping one sleeve and then the other, displaying those barely covered chocolate curves, sending my dick from hard to rock solid. I made quick work of removing my clothes as Nedra bit down on her fingernail and watched. She backed up to the foot of my bed and then sat down and started unbuckling her shoes. I approached her with my dick slapping the inside of my thigh. "Leave them motherfuckers on. And that outfit, too." She blushed, leaning back on her elbows, showing no resistance as I went down on my knees and spread her legs apart. Eyes up and fixed on her, I slipped a single digit into her pussy. Shit was so tight and warm around my finger, I could only imagine how good it would feel sliding up and down my dick. Nedra moaned, spreading her legs further apart, rocking against my finger with her mouth open wide. Those juicy lips looked so pretty. I couldn't wait to watch them scream my name. I slid my finger out of her pussy and licked the juices off while she watched in suspense. Then I tugged at the crotch of her romper, pulling it into a wedge right up against her clit, before pulling it back out and holding it to the side. Lowering my face between her legs, the soft scent of her musk made my mouth water. As my tongue connected with her swollen bulb, I knew that nothing in life would ever taste this sweet. "Fuck!" she screamed, gripping the back of my head and forcing my mouth harder against her pussy. I didn't mind a bit, lapping my tongue up and down her split, slurping up her wetness and holding her by the hips. I hummed against her clit, sending her body into trembles. Her thighs clamped on the sides of my face as she curled into my mouth. "I'm gonna come, Justin. Oh my God! She trembled through a scream, squirting all over my face as I continued to lick her clit. My fucking face was a mess, one I didn't care to clean up. As I got up off the floor and cupped her thighs to scoot her up to the head of the bed, Nedra's pussy glistened under the fishnet material of her romper. I hoped she didn't mind if I ripped the crotch open, 'cause I didn't have time to undress her, and that's exactly what I was about to do. "What the fuck, Jess? Do you know how much this thing costs?" she shrieked, as I reached down and ripped open the material between her legs, basking in the pinkness displayed before me. "I'll buy you a new one," I grinned, taking my eyes away from her pussy long enough to retrieve a condom from my nightstand. "You can't. It's sentimental." She ran her hand down between her legs to inspect the garment I'd literally ripped to shreds. "What? Old Nose bought it for you or something?" I joked, sliding the magnum down over my shaft, not the least bit turned off by her being upset about lingerie. "Don't answer that." I put a finger to her lips, kissing her there before starting a tear at the neckline of her romper and ripping it open all the way down to her waist. Her breasts sprung free like two ripe melons, chocolate nipples facing the ceiling, begging to be taken into my mouth. Nedra breathed out in disbelief at what I'd just done to her clothes, but I didn't give her time to protest, lowering my lips to her nipples and sucking each one so hard that it made her arch her back. "This was a custom piece." Her moans kissed the top of my head as I shoved 2 fingers in her slippery pussy, still swallowing her nipples, feeling them swell against my tongue. "You're so fucking disrespectful," she panted, rolling her hips against my palm, pussy soaked from the inside out. "Do you want me to stop?" I mumbled, with her nipple in my mouth. "Want to take this pussy home and handle it by yourself?" I continued sucking, fingering her so hard she had to grab me by the wrist. "No," she breathed out, rocking against my hand. Her body started to shake, and before long, she was coming again. As she calmed from the climax, I laid her down on her back, removing her tattered clothing and casting it onto the floor. Nedra was perfect. Round hips and full C-cups that pulled my eyes out of my head and my dick from a slump. I locked into a stare with a set of eyes that were so dark I could see my reflection in them. She bit down on her lip, smiling her way through sexual bliss. I could have stared at her ass forever, but I had to dive in that pussy first. I spread her thighs apart, sinking in with one hard thrust. She purred into my ear, pulling me further inside with her legs wrapped tight around my waist. I kissed her neck, then sucked it slow, shoving in and out of her body while her breasts smashed against my chest. She raised her hips to meet each stroke almost competitively, nails scraping my back harder with every throw. She was holding on for dear life, panting and moaning, damn near in tears. And I didn't give a damn about having mercy on that pussy. I was prepared to fuck her to death. Feeling tingles in my balls of pending climax, I slid out and turned Nedra over on her hands and knees. The sight from this angle was fucking glorious, sweeping her legs apart with my knee to put that pretty pink pussy on display. She looked back at me like a lioness on the prowl, before I pressed at the small of her back and guided her into an arch. Her pussy was glistening, and her musk was filling the room. I went face first into that ass and did my best to lick it clean. "God damn it, Justin," she finally screamed my name. I wet my thumb with her juices and slid it in her ass. "You're so fucking nasty," she whimpered. throwing her ass back against me, sliding her pussy up and down my face, allowing me to finger fuck her asshole, instantly making my dick harder. "You like that shit?" I whispered between her legs, lapping my tongue up and down her folds and savoring the sweet nectar. "Yes, please don't stop," she replied, with her face buried in one of the pillows at the head of my bed. After one deep lick, I rose up and mounted her from behind, leaving my thumb in her ass and sliding my dick inside her pussy. She screamed, digging her nails into my covers, throwing it back at me harder as I slapped her on the ass. Fuck, this pussy's so good. I slammed into her harder and faster, blinking my eyes closed for a second to stop myself from coming too quick. "Can I fuck your ass, Nedra?" I'd gotten too worked up to set limits. I wanted to fill every hole in her body and hoped she would oblige. "Don't hurt me," she moaned, so taken over with lust that she'd probably submit to anything. I slid my dick out of her pussy and lubed her asshole with more of her juices, then pressed my head against the opening of her ass, gently pushing without making much progress. "Relax, baby." I reinserted my thumb, and she accepted it. I could see her pussy getting wetter. "Okay." She looked back at me before laying her head back on the pillow, spreading her knees further apart as I attempted to go in again. So slick with her juices, the head of my dick slid in. Nedra whimpered as I pushed in further, then tears came to her eyes. I asked if she wanted me to stop, and she asked me to just go slow. I was so swollen inside the walls of her ass, I didn't know how much longer I could go without busting. Still throbbing inside her, I laid her down on her side, wrapping an arm around her waist and pulling her tight against me. Gentle strokes seemed to be doing the trick. I could feel the tension leaving her body as she raised up a leg, inviting more of me in, pulling my finger in her mouth and sucking it to pacify her screams. Shit was so tight and warm as I slid in and out. I used my free hand to cup her breast while I slowly stroked her asshole. "You feel so fucking good, Nedra," I whispered against her neck. "Am I hurting you?" I asked, sliding in and out slowly. "Yes, but don't stop." She turned her head back to kiss me, shoving her tongue into my mouth, breathing intensified with every stroke. "You're fucking me in my ass," she cried out, as if she couldn't believe it herself. "I've never... Fuck!" She couldn't finish her sentence as I pumped into her harder. Skin damp with sweat, the front of my thighs smacked against the back of hers as I plummeted deeper inside her, flashes of light crossing my eyes every time I pulled out. Shit was blissful. Seeing the mix of pain and pleasure in her eyes as our tongues tangled and her ass closed tight around my dick. I couldn't remember ever being this physically and visually stimulated at the same time. It was only going to be a matter of time before I came, and the sound of her moaning into my mouth, swearing that she'd let me fuck her like this in every kind of way for as long as I wanted it, went straight to my sack and threw me over the edge. "Oh my God!" she screamed, bouncing her ass back against me, cheeks sliding up and down my abs, ass glowing and round and so fucking beautiful. "You're gonna make me... Fuck, Justin!" she screamed. Wet noises from her pussy creaming exciting me to no end, slight friction around my dick and the tight walls of her asshole pulling and squeezing just hard enough to pull out every ounce of semen I had. I wrapped my arms around her waist, pulling her tight against me as I sank deep inside her and blasted off, feeling her body convulse as she reached a climax of her own. I could hardly catch my breath. lips throbbing and wet from kissing Nedra through the duration of our climax. I hadn't expected her to walk through my door for more than half the
Sample complete. Ready to continue?